Back in the 1960s, if you told an Aussie your biggest dream was a penthouse apartment, they'd probably offer you a cup of tea and a lie down. The real prize, the ultimate symbol of having made it, was a sprawling house on a quarter-acre block, a hills hoist spinning in the backyard, and a nice, solid fence. Australian cities are built on this very idea. Everyone's building out. But one guy, a total outsider to the property game, had a completely radical thought. Why not build up? While the rest of the country was obsessed with beautiful backyards and big blocks, he was looking at the empty air above the city and seeing a gold mine. Fast forward 6 decades, and the name High Rise Harry has grown beyond a simple nickname to become a monument carved into the very skyline of the nation. It represents one of the most aggressive, unrelenting, and transformative real estate empires Australia has ever witnessed. His real name is Harry Triguboff, and he's the founder of Meriton, a billionaire property mogul, and the man responsible for building more high-rise apartments than any other developer in the country by a staggering margin. But his incredible wealth is only part of the equation. The real story here is one of complete disruption. How did a Russian-Israeli immigrant, a man who once drove taxis and failed at selling fabrics, build a multi-billion-dollar property and hotel empire from nothing? Harry Triguboff's story begins far from the boardrooms of Sydney, in a world of chaos and upheaval. He was born Harry Oscar Triguboff in 1933 in Dalian, and he grew up in Tianjin, a major port city in China. His parents had fled the anti-Semitism of Tsarist Russia in 1916, setting up a life on the shabbier fringe of the British and American concessions. There, his father ran a store trading anything to turn a buck, like woolen cloth, silk, leather, and struggled to pay the rent. Harry remembers a childhood of sharing a single room with his older brother Joseph and their Russian nanny. It was a world of stark contrasts. He vividly recalls watching desperately poor Chinese laborers lugging sacks of grain onto barges, while even poorer locals snuck up behind them, cutting holes in the sacks to collect the seeping grain just to feed themselves. Everything changed when Japan invaded China in 1937 and later entered World War II. After the Japanese interned their British and American business rivals, Russians like the Triguboffs were largely left alone. Seizing the opportunity, his father's business boomed. His father established 4 more stores and, in a move that would profoundly influence his son, put much of his new wealth into property, acquiring around 20 apartment buildings in Tianjin. The family's fortunes were transformed, and they eventually bought a bigger house with separate rooms and a car. Young Harry was often taken to watch the construction, getting his first taste of the development world. This wartime prosperity was short-lived. With the war over and a civil war brewing in China, his parents made the decision to send the boys to safety. Harry was sent to head to Australia for his education, landing in Sydney in 1948 while his parents finalised their affairs, fully intending to follow. But they became caught in a painful geopolitical limbo that would define the next 2 decades of Harry's life. The Australian government, acting on allegations of wartime collaboration against his father, repeatedly denied his parents a visa. The family would never be reunited in Australia. Both his mother and father would eventually pass away in Israel, away from Harry and his brother. That agonizing family drama played out in the background as Harry tried to find his own path. After his schooling in Sydney, he went to the UK to study textiles, visiting his parents in Israel during the summers. He even tried working his father's new textile business there, but it was a bad fit. In his own words, "I thought my father's ideas were out of date. I thought I knew all the answers, which I didn't, and was impatient." At his mother's suggestion, he returned to Australia in the early 1960s after a brief stint in South Africa, becoming an Australian citizen in 1961. He arrived with ambition but no direction, discovering that textiles was a dying industry. For the next couple of years, he drifted through a series of odd jobs to make ends meet. He drove a taxi, he ran a profitable milk round in Chatswood, he dabbled in selling real estate, and even worked as an assistant to a university lecturer. But as he put it, the combined salary still wasn't very good, and he knew he wouldn't get far. With the deep frustration of a family torn apart and a string of dead-end jobs, this ultimate outsider was forced to rely on nobody but himself. The turning point came from a personal project. Instead of buying a house, he invested his small amount of money into a block of land in Roseville to build one himself. The builder he hired turned out to be awful. Fed up, Harry recalled, "I threw him out and finished the job myself, learning from his mistakes." That hands-on experience was the spark. Using what he'd learned, he bought a second block of land, this time in Tempe, and started building a block of 8 units with a partner. Once again, disaster struck. The foreman was drunk, forcing Harry to learn the business of subcontractors on the fly. He was so unsure if he'd make a profit that he held his breath until the roof was on. But the project was a huge success, thanks in part to an incredible stroke of luck. He hadn't realized that the land was next to a rubbish tip, which hurt the value. But when seagulls feeding on the rubbish started getting sucked into the engines of planes flying overhead, the council moved the tip. Suddenly, the value of his units shot up. That first taste of turning dirt into profit was all he needed. Harry Triguboff had found his calling in bricks and mortar. He immediately bought another block of land, telling the owner he couldn't pay him until the roof went on. With that, the momentum began. In 1963, he officially launched Meriton, naming it after a street in Gladesville where he finished another early project. This was a true one-man show. No family money, no corporate investors, and no safety net. The entire value was built on his own gut instincts, the hard lessons from his first chaotic builds, and a core belief that Sydney's future was vertical. This vision was completely at odds with an Australian culture where the national identity was woven into the fabric of suburbia. Apartments were, and in some cases still are, widely seen as second-class housing, temporary accommodation for students, migrants, or young people before they could afford a real home. The Australian dream is a house with a backyard. The idea of raising a family in a box in the sky was, and to many still is, deeply unappealing. But Harry didn't care what people thought. In fact, he built his entire career on swimming against the current. He thrived on the exact opposite of what everyone else was doing. He saw 2 huge, overlooked markets that the established developers were ignoring. First, there were people who simply couldn't afford the ever-increasing price of a standalone house. Second, and perhaps most astutely, there were women. In the 1960s, it was notoriously difficult for women, especially single women, to secure a bank loan. The financial system was deeply patriarchal, and Harry saw this as a massive opportunity. When the bank said no, Harry said yes. He began offering vendor finance directly to female buyers, cutting the banks out of the equation. It was a revolutionary move that built immense customer loyalty and also opened up a whole new demographic of property owners. He went all in on apartments. His strategy evolved quickly, starting with low-rise blocks, then progressing to mid-rise buildings, and finally to the massive high-rises that would define his career. While other developers hesitated, worried about cultural resistance, Harry focused on the raw numbers. Sydney's population was exploding, land was getting harder to find, and affordability, or lack thereof, was starting to creep in. By the 1980s, Meriton was a major force in Sydney's property scene, and by the 1990s, it was the undisputed king. This relentless building spree is how he earned the nickname High Rise Harry. It started out as a jab from journalists, a way to poke fun at the developer building huge towers where no one thought they'd fit. They painted him as brash, maybe even reckless. But Harry, he leaned into it completely. He treated the name like a trophy. While his critics wrote angry articles about shadows and density, Meriton was quietly reshaping entire suburbs. Old industrial sites and sleepy neighborhoods in places like Parramatta, Mascot, and Zetland were being reborn as buzzing hubs of apartment living. But while his public battles were with critics, his biggest test came from a financial storm that nearly wiped him out. The property market crash of 1974 was an existential threat. An American lender suddenly demanded all their loans be repaid immediately, and with the market in freefall, he couldn't get a satisfactory price for his newly completed apartments. Facing bankruptcy, he made a decision that, in hindsight, was a stroke of genius. Instead of selling at a massive loss, he took the units off the market and put them up for rent. This move created a steady new stream of cash flow that allowed him to survive the crisis. It became a core pillar of the Meriton model and the foundation of the financial fortress that would make him nearly invincible in future downturns. Triguboff's business model soon evolved to building fully functional communities from the ground up. He embraced the concept of the master-planned precinct, where his residential towers were just the centerpiece of a much larger ecosystem. His projects would often include entire infrastructure like bustling retail strips on the ground floor, essential childcare centers for young families, and even landscaped parks and new roads. By creating a vibrant, walkable community where residents could live, shop, and relax without having to travel far, he made his apartments immensely more attractive. While other developers followed the simple build and sell mantra to quickly cash out and move on, playing that long game, holding on to a vast portfolio of apartments in the very communities he built, was the key to his dominance. The two strategies worked in perfect harmony. The desirable, self-contained precincts attracted reliable tenants, and the resulting river of rental income made him almost immune to market crashes. A key reason for Meriton's success lies in the seamless, end-to-end control it has over the development process. Rather than outsourcing, Meriton handles nearly every aspect in-house, with dedicated teams for site acquisition, architecture, construction, sales, and marketing all working in harmony. The result is a highly coordinated and efficient approach to creating holistic living environments. Meriton has its own architects who can tweak and reuse successful designs, saving millions in fees. Its own construction teams gives it immense control over build quality and speed, and it also has its own sales and marketing departments that understand the product intimately, and its own property management division to handle the massive rental portfolio. This means Harry controls the entire assembly line, from the moment a piece of land is purchased to the day a tenant moves in, and for years afterward. It allows Meriton to build at a speed and scale that baffles its competitors. And when we say massive, we mean massive. Since its inception, Meriton has built nearly 80,000 apartments. To put that in perspective, that's more than enough to house the entire population of a city like Darwin and its population of less than 150,000. On any given day, the company is actively working on thousands of units at once across multiple cities. Even with his development empire running at full steam, Harry was still hunting for the next opportunity. He found it by identifying a massive gap in the hotel market that everyone else was ignoring. In his own words, "I saw there was a gap in the hotel accommodation market for groups of people and families who wanted to stay together when traveling. Back then, the standard was a small hotel room built for two. They lacked the basic comforts of home." Realizing he was already building the perfect solution, he made his move. In 2003, he officially launched Meriton Serviced Apartments, a brand that would evolve into the luxury chain Meriton Suites. The concept took off, proving Harry's instinct was right. Today, Meriton Suites is a giant in the hotel world, operating thousands of suites across the country. The key difference, as Harry designed it, is that the suites feel more like a home than a hotel. Built on his residential apartment designs, they're huge, often double the size of a standard hotel room, and come with separate bedrooms, living areas, fully equipped kitchens, and internal laundries. This hybrid model has been a huge disruptor, and the growth continues at a breakneck pace. In late 2023 alone, the company invested over $400 million to launch 3 new hotels in Canberra, Melbourne, and Liverpool, cementing its status as the largest owner-operator of apartment-style suites in Australia. Building a dual empire in property and hotels requires a relentless personality, and Harry Triguboff has never been the quiet, agreeable type. He's famously outspoken, with a reputation for blunt, unfiltered opinions that is happy to share with anyone. He has repeatedly and publicly challenged a long list of officials on everything from immigration and interest rates to housing policy. But his controversial nature extends beyond just speaking his mind. His business tactics have, at times, been just as aggressive. In a notable case in 2018, Meriton was slapped with a $3 million fine for a practice that became known as masking. The company was found to be deliberately manipulating TripAdvisor reviews by preventing guests who had a negative experience from receiving the standard Review Express email prompt. If staff suspected a guest was unhappy, they would simply add extra letters to their email addresses in the system, ensuring the review invitation would never arrive. In a nation that's often cautious and conflicted about real estate development, Harry's aggressive approach has made him a figure of both admiration and intense criticism. Environmental groups have accused him of promoting overdevelopment and concreting the cities. Urban planners have called his projects reckless and lacking in aesthetic grace. But through it all, he has remained completely unfazed. His logic has always been brutally simple. People need homes. Growing cities need density to avoid choking on their own sprawl. And if governments weren't moving fast enough to provide the housing, he would do it himself. He saw himself as a problem solver on a national scale. So, after 6 decades of relentless building, just how rich is High-Rise Harry? Harry Triguboff's net worth regularly places him at or near the very top of Australia's rich lists. But here's the most fascinating part of his wealth. He didn't flip everything for a quick profit like most developers. He held on and became the landlord to a city-sized population. This means that even when the property market tanks and sales dry up, Harry's money machine keeps printing. The rent keeps flowing in, from thousands of apartments across multiple cities every single week. It's the ultimate long game strategy. It's what turned a modest builder into an unshakable property colossus, insulated from the very market cycles that he helps create. So, what then is Harry Triguboff's true legacy? Well, it's a complicated one, written across the skylines of Australia's biggest cities. On one hand, his defenders point to the undeniable fact that he housed hundreds of thousands of people, normalized density, and provided a powerful counter-argument to endless urban sprawl. His business model of a closed-loop system of building, owning, and renting is a masterclass in strategic, long-term empire building. But the other side of that legacy is just as visible. To his critics, his name is synonymous with overdevelopment and the creation of generic concrete jungles that replaced unique neighborhood character. His aggressive build at all costs philosophy often clashed with urban planners and environmental groups who warned of the consequences. This win at all costs approach defined not just his construction sites, but his controversial business tactics as well. Ultimately, you can't tell the story of modern Australia without saying the name High-Rise Harry. His career is a powerful case study in how a single, relentless vision can fundamentally reshape a country, leaving behind a skyline that is, for better or for worse, a monument to both progress and its profound costs. But what do you think? Is High-Rise Harry a visionary who saved Australian cities from endless suburban sprawl? Or did his relentless development come at the cost of community character and affordability? Drop your thoughts on Triguboff's legacy or your own experience with high-rise living in the comments section below, because we always read the comments and would love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.